Dear lovers of literature, this evening embodies what Passaporta, Brussels International House of Literature, believes to be highly valuable. A reflection on social issues that regard and touch all of us, presented through the lens of literature, hence allowing us in as readers and tonight also as listeners. Both the French writer Édouard Louis and the Scottish-American writer Douglas Stuart have written powerful books on the tight hold of social class and the harmful social definitions of masculinity and femininity. Both authors turning a highly personal experience into an indictment, but also a tender declaration of love. Belgian writer and journalist Annelies Beck will be tonight's host to represent us as readers on stage and to talk to both authors about their work, their writing, and the world. Fragments of Combat et métamorphoses d'une femme and of Shuggie Bain will be read by their authors. The translation will be projected since we are celebrating tonight the publication of Shuggie Bain into French, a translation by Charles Bonneau, and the publication of Strijd en métamorphose van een vrouw, a Dutch translation by Jan-Pieter van der Sterre and Rijntje Gols. Both books, in the original as well as in the available translations, will be on sale by Passaporta Bookshop after the talk, and the writers have agreed to sign your copy for you. Un grand merci aux éditions Globe qui nous ont non seulement permis de découvrir Shuggie Bain en français, mais également d'accueillir Douglas Stuart ce soir à Bruxelles. En ook dank aan de Bezige Bij voor de Nederlandse vertaling en de samenwerking vanavond. And a heartfelt thanks to Flagey for co-hosting this event and welcoming us here once again. And to you all for being here, I wish you a wonderful evening.
Did you hear that sound? That was live applause. It's incredible. Yes! We can actually, I don't know about the two of you, but feel the heat coming off all those bodies out there. Now, I know this is probably not as comfortable as when you're seated behind a screen at your home, looking into this small green dot on top of your computer, but I'm sure you'll get used to it. Also, be careful when you wave your arms, because there are real-life people next to you. But otherwise, welcome, 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 welcome. This is great. Okay. We are here, and we are delighted, and I'm speaking on behalf of all of us, to welcome two writers in the flesh, two writers who, through their novels, literally and figuratively, moved, conquered and confused, irritated and inspired, bowled over and flabbergasted readers from all over the world. They were showered with prizes, still are, lauded and applauded by the gatekeepers of the literary world and elite. They were and are. I'll ask about that later. Before we go into the conversation, let me tell you that this whole evening, as you may have guessed, is going to be in English, apart from the one bit that Édouard Louis will be reading from his novel. That's in French, and as Ilke said, there will be top titling instead of subtitling for everybody to be able to follow. Also, sadly, but understandably perhaps, there's no Q&A afterwards, but some of you have been putting in questions beforehand, and I promise I will take as many on board during the conversation as possible. And last but not least, one more practical thing, the authors will both sign copies of their book, your copies, after the event during half an hour. In order to make it possible for as many of you to get your book signed, you will be handed a post-it note, so do write your name on it or the name of the person you want it to be dedicated to, and then this will run swiftly and smoothly, I'm sure. Enough of the practicalities. I'm going to introduce these gentlemen to you, and then we're going to have a conversation. Édouard Louis, here. Édouard Louis took the French literary world by storm with En finir avec Eddie Bellegueule, the story of his growing up in a village in the north of France. His family is poor, and Édouard, then Eddie, was a young gay boy feeling unwelcome, rejected, insulté for what he was and is. In following books, Histoire de la violence, Qui a tué mon père, and most recently, with Combat et métamorphose d'une femme, about his mother, he not only describes his life, but also lays bare the power structures that underlie life of the so-called poor or working class. And hot of the presses is Changer méthode, yet another layer to this unique body of work and form of literary autobiography annex socio-political analysis. Now in the hands of Édouard Louis, literature is a revolutionary weapon. Ce sont des livres qui sont des armes pour les autres. Next, and you can applaud him too, is Douglas Stuart. He won the 2020 Booker Prize for Shuggie Bain, his novel about a swishy boy growing up in Glasgow, Scotland in the 80s. Shuggie's mother, Agnes, is a force of nature, both lovable, admirable, and destructive. Or maybe I should say destructed. We can talk about that later. The novel is a love story between a mother and a son, an ode to a city and to life, in spite of dire, and it's a poor word, circumstances. As a reader, your heart bleeds and leaps while your brain fires with indignation. This is a story about people forced to live in harsh circumstances, and the humanity and the beauty of the book makes the injustice of that stand out all the more. And before he came out, if I may use that word, as a writer, he worked for years and years in textile and fashion across the ocean in the States, putting the distance between him and his past that enabled him to write Shuggie Bain. Gentlemen, welcome. And I'm going to shut up and ask you questions. You haven't been on stage together before, have you? Never. No? Do take. So, what do you think?
Hello, thank you for being here, and thank you, Douglas, and thanks to you. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Of course, I wouldn't be here; I would be home. So it's a great honor, and yeah, I know we will talk about important issues and things that we want to be important for other people too. So yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned in a conversation with Ken Loach that you see this kind of events and going to schools to talk about your books as really part of the writing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, for people who have been trying to write about excluded people, poor people, dominated people, there was always a kind of mourning in the process of the writing itself. It means that when you are writing for dominated people, and you know that these dominated people won't read you. You know, you write for them, and they will never. I mean, maybe not never, but most of the time, not have access to what you are doing. And sometimes we kind of try to find escapes or comforting ideas in saying, no, we can make it work for more people to read, for other people to read. But sociologically speaking, it's naive. It cannot happen this way, because the dominated class is dominated because also, as part of many things, because they are excluded from the access to culture. So you cannot say, sociologically speaking, I want these people to have access to literature, Because if they have access to it, it means that they are not part of the working class anymore.
So,
and it means they are not the people you're writing for and fighting for and writing about and all that stuff. So the only way is a revolution, you know? It's going to politics, going on the street, put fire on the street, fight the governments, fight the people who destroy your lives. That's the only way. Literature is something else. It's another thing. And it's too easy to say, I will, you know, make the crowd bigger and the readership bigger. And so I think the question we should ask ourselves when we write, you know, we have been talking about the responsibility of the writer since Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. And I think the responsibility of the writer is not only what she or what he writes, but also what he or what she does as a writer. So
in
for
the
me,
real world, you mean, not just on the page.
So when we talk about the responsibility of the writer, traditionally when Sartre or Beauvoir or other people were talking about it, the question was, what are we writing about? Who are we talking about? What kind of class, what kind of people, what kind of categories of people are we talking about? I think the next step is to think like, what do we do as writers? Not only in what we write, but what we do, going to talk to people, going to high school, writing in the papers, going to the media, going in the streets, and finding a way of expanding the power of what you are trying to do in your writing when you are writing. Okay. And I would be a coward if I would just be writing on my side, on my little room, and not trying to get other people to fight with me in other contexts, in the street or in this room tonight, so clearly.
That's what we'll be talking about. Thank you very much. Do you feel the same way? Because I know you've been on a huge tour. You must be exhausted. You don't look it. But as a writer on tour, you do give a lot. Do you feel that responsibility? Do you share that idea? And also, do you get something back from it? Or is it really only giving?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. It's lovely to see so many people tonight and to be around people. I certainly feel the responsibility. My writing career is in a different stage to Édouard's. It's really certainly just beginning. But actually, oftentimes the responsibility is also thrust upon me because I'm seen very quickly as something other in literary circles, that I'm writing from a point of view that often isn't in the publishing world. And so whether I accept it or not, I'm very rarely allowed to go into a room where I'm not representing an entire class or an entire way of life. And so you have to take up that mantle and you have to do your best. But I also feel that the working class are not monolithic. And so I try to always balance my own personal experience with a very varied group of people that want different things. And certainly even within my own experience, you know, I began as a working class kid. I began in a family who all worked, and then we descended quite quickly into the underclass because there was no jobs, and I was raised on government benefits by my mother. Underclass is not the best word, but certainly, you know, just to show some variation within the working class. But it is true. But I also do think that sometimes sharing everything you have to share and telling your story and sharing your work does more than we think it does. And I think it moves an enormous amount of people. It inspires a lot of people. But it also sometimes answers a lot of silence that's in the world that, that needs to be answered, I suppose.
Thank you for that. There's a lot in what both of you have said that we will be unpacking throughout the evening. But what I suggest is that I talk to each of you for a couple of minutes to set very clearly what the book is about, what your writing is about, and that we then, starting from your reading first, go into the conversation with the both of you. So, Édouard Louis. We're here, Ilke mentioned it, because there are new translations from Combat et métamorphoses d'une femme. The previous books, generally speaking, from the very debut until what you wrote about your father in Who Killed My Father, were focused on your father. Now, a novel about your mother. What made you decide to focus on her?
Probably many things, but one thing that really started me writing this book is what I describe in the first page of this book, Combat métamorphoses d'une femme. One day I was home, I was trying to kind of, I don't know, organize things at my place, which is always very difficult for me because I'm the worst in terms of organization. And in one of my cupboard, I found a picture of my mother. And on that picture, my mother was maybe 18, 90, 20 years old, something like this. She was extremely young. And I didn't know I had this picture. How did I get it? I don't remember. Probably one day my mother gave me like a stack of pictures and I put it there. And I saw that picture and I realized that on that picture my mother was so beautiful and so free and so full of hope and so full of like energy. She's taking a selfie in the 1980s, you know, she was very kind of avant-garde and she's taking this selfie and her eyes and her face and her smile and everything is full of hope and full of desire. She's trying maybe to seduce the person who is watching the picture. And it had nothing to do with the woman I knew a few years before, when I became her son, when I came to birth, and when she became my mother. Because the woman I knew when I was a child was a gray woman, destructive woman, always very sad, always very depressed, very often very aggressive, you know. She was constantly telling me, why are you like this? Why are you like a pussy? Why do you talk like a faggot? Why are you not normal? And from my father, she was this woman who was supposed to stay home. My father didn't want her to work. My father didn't want her to put makeup. He said that it was for sluts. He would tell her, you stay home and you raise the kids and you make food for me. And every evening he would disappear with his friends, ses copains, and we would never know when he would come back. And we had to wait for him. So he was not only the master of our lives, he was also the master of time. And my mother, if she wasn't waiting for him, if we dared having dinner before him, it was a crisis. Why didn't you wait for me? I am the one who decides when we eat. And I thought, what happened? What happened between this picture of my mother at 18 and the woman I met after my birth, like 20, 15 years later, when I was a kid, who was this sad, gray, destructive person. And that book started like this. I wanted to make a kind of archaeology of this destruction. Why this smile disappeared from her face when I grew up with her. And there started my itinerary of writing about her, on her, with the other aspect, very new aspect, which was that right before finding this picture, a few years before, my mother threw my father away from the house. She put all his stuff in garbage bags. She threw everything through the window, and she told him never to come back again after 20 years. And so, as a piece of music, the book is built in 3 movements. The smile of this young woman, the destruction of this smile from society, from poverty, from my father, from masculine domination, and then this kind of attempt and this kind of struggle to get these freedoms that she had lost because of my father and because of society through my father.
It's remarkable. You put your own role in how she lives life in the spotlight as well. You describe a scene, for example, where you have started secondary school and start studying, so you distance yourself more and more from the situation you grew up in, and you start using words that she doesn't know or she doesn't use, and you put it literally there that it's an act of violence on your part against her to some extent. You know you're hurting her. You've written about violence in previous books as well, and how it can repeat itself, and how even someone who is suffering from violence will then reenact it or reproduce it. Do you see that as an instance of that reproduction of violence by you against your mother?
In a way, yes, because violence creates violence, but violence can also undo violence sometimes, you know?
In what way?
I mean, I'm very interested to talk about that afterwards with Douglas. The thing is, it took me 25 years to become the son of my mother. I think it's kind of different from you and your character in the book, even if there are some things in common. The fact is, I didn't know my mother. I didn't want to know my mother, and in a way, she didn't want to know me, I think, because she was suffering. She had no time to care about what I was going through, and I didn't want her to know me, you know? I didn't want to go back home and say, hello, maman, everybody calls me faggot at school and reject me, can you help me? I didn't want to know her to know that.
Because you didn't trust her to not react in the same way?
No, because I was ashamed to be a gay boy. My dream was to be straight. I wanted to be straight, and I thought like maybe I'm just sick, or maybe I'm just wrong. And if my mother thinks that I'm gay, I don't want her to know that other people think the same way. And so in my whole childhood, my mother was like distant, even if there are like some moments of closeness. And then when she was, as I was saying, she was telling me, you are not normal. Why do you act like that? Why do you act like a pussy? And then when I went to high school, being the first in the family to go to high school, I wanted a revenge against her. And now I'm so ashamed that I did that. But I did that because I was continuing a violence that she was putting upon me, a violence that she was continuing from what my father was putting upon her, you know? So it looks really like a Greek tragedy. The violence is circulating. Exactly. But the thing is, so when I went to high school, I started to learn like words from the bourgeoisie, you know, like beautiful words, things that are presented as beautiful ways of talking. And when I would go back home, I would talk with this language in order to humiliate my mother, to tell her, I'm better than you now. You told me I was nothing.
Message.
Yeah, you told me that I was nothing. You told me I'm a faggot, and I'm better than you. Mm-hmm. You were wrong. But then, I'm sorry,
sure.
I'm too talkative like always. But
that's why you're here.
The thing is, this was the first movement. I was talking about movements previously. This was the first movement, and the second movement is that precisely when I went to high school, I put this distance, even bigger distance between my mother and me. And eventually, in the city where I went to high school, I realized that some women had better lives than my mother. I mean, more freedom, more privileges. I didn't know anyone in the city who, like my mother, didn't have the right to put makeup. I didn't know anyone who had to raise 5 kids and a husband with 600 or 700 euros a month. I didn't know anyone who was going like this. And seeing this distance, and this lack of privilege that other people, I was figuring out other people were having, when I would go back to the village, I started to say to my mother, but it's unfair. My father cannot treat you like that. And the thing is, the same violence splitted us from each other. The masculine violence, me as a gay boy, I was excluded by masculine violence, and my mother, as a woman, she was excluded and violented by this masculine violence. And these things that splitted her house, when I understood that we were suffering from the same violence, a kind of conversation started. And we realized that we were the object of the same dynamic, of the same thing. And from there started something, and as I say, there is something strange in the mechanism of domination, which we could call the kind of paradox of domination. The fact that sometimes, because you are excluded, you have more chances to be free, because exclusion puts you apart from society, and you see society from from the
outside.
distance. Most of the time, domination, don't get me wrong, domination destructs you and kills you, okay? But sometimes, destruction and domination is what puts you away from the world. And because of that, you see the world. And my mother, she was in that position, and I was in that position. We had something to reclaim to the society. We had something to get back. And as a woman, she knew that society had been taking things from her. She knew my father was telling her, you stay home, you raise the kid, you shut up. And my father, as a man, as a straight man, even when he was suffering, most of the time he had the illusion that he chose to suffer, you know? I didn't go to school because I'm a real man. I have a tough job because I'm a real man. I drink so much and I destroy my body because I'm a real man. So the violence had the kind of illusion of a choice for him.
Of a logic and a choice.
But my mother,
and agency.
no, she always knew that society had taken something from her. And so Combat and Métamorphose d'une femme recount the moment where she comes to reclaim what society took from her.
I want to draw you into this because you were nodding a lot, reacting to what Édouard Louis was saying. To begin with, at the moment he was saying, I was trying to hide, I was ashamed of being gay, of finding it out, or of how I was treated. Was that your experience as well?
That was 100% my experience. It was almost like Edward was inside my head for a moment there, and it's kind of scary that we can be separated by countries and actually probably a decade or so and still live the same experience. But what really resonated with me was when Edward said about, you know, mothers and sons knowing each other. And although Shuggie Bain is a work of fiction, I think part of the reason why I wrote it was to deal with the grief and the loss of losing my own mother. Now, my mother suffered with addiction my entire childhood, and I lost her when I was 16 one day. And so I never really got to be, excuse me, I never got to be an adult and know my mother as an adult. We never got to have that relationship. But because my mother suffered with addiction and because we were both visited by the same type of violence, you're right, it was the same system that oppressed both of us. We spent an awful lot of time in isolation when I was a kid. And when you're the child of an addict, you realize, or you develop so many coping strategies to try and keep your parent happy and focused and away from the worst of what addiction will do to them. And that can be many things. That can be neater or quieter or better at school, or you cook, or you just try to entertain them.
Or you write their biography?
Well, yeah, that's it. But when I'm about 7 or 8, I realize that what my mother wants most of all is to be heard, just for someone to listen to her.
You knew that at 7 or 8 already?
Yeah, I was incredibly young. And I realized that that's what she wanted. You know, our relationship sometimes is like a mother and son, but sometimes I'm like her little husband, oftentimes. And alcohol is such a leveler. It takes away so many barriers and social barriers that my mother didn't tell me once upon a time stories when she would tell me stories. She would tell me very adult stories about desire, about loss, about being spurned, about being used. Sometimes they were incredibly sexual. And I'm 7 or 8. And I'm realizing if I pretend or I take her memoirs, then she will keep her focus on me. And at the time, as a child, I realized this is really unusual. None of my other friends are going through this. But as an adult now, I'm incredibly grateful for that time I had with my mother, as traumatizing as it could often be. I mean, I heard things I wish I'd never heard, to be totally honest. But when I come to write Shuggie Bain, I want, first of all, the reader to understand the character as not a mother, because I understood that my mother was an iceberg of a woman, and I only knew her as my mother. If you only know someone as your mother, you only know them as a tiny little bit, because, as Edward said, there's a whole life there that you're not witness to. And so these conversations with my mother were really instructive for me, and I really tried to use them in the fiction. You meet Agnes, first of all, as a friend, as a foe. You know, she's a wife and her marriage is sort of ending. But you don't meet her children when you meet Agnes at the beginning. That comes much later. And in fact, what it has proven to me in writing the book is when a woman becomes a mother, that almost becomes her entire identity and erases so much of the rest of it.
To that role. Yeah.
That's right. And readers affirm that for me when I speak to them. And it's always surprising because they say about Agnes as a character, wow, she was a bad mother. She let people down. And I always try and say to the reader, actually, she was incredibly hurt. And as an individual first, her responsibility is to herself, not to her children. And so that sort of relationship that we have with our mothers and trying to understand them on a deeper level, I think unites a lot of our work.
Mm-hmm. You chose to write it as fiction. You've never made a secret of it that the inspiration lies in your own life, that there are parallels and so on, but it's marketed differently, let me put it that way. Yours is more officially autobiography. We can go into the use of that word later, but why did you choose this form? Did you want to distance yourself to some extent?
There was many reasons. I felt a little worthless. I didn't know that necessarily writing something of true autofiction, that I had the value that anyone would want to read it. I think that's a lot of internalized things about being a West of Scotland man, about what value has your story, keep it to yourself, don't tell anyone. I also used fiction as a way to tell some truths that maybe I didn't have the bravery to tell if I had decided to write it from just one little boy's point of view. But I also realized, a lot of people ask me if writing the book was cathartic. It's a little bit of a cliche. It was cathartic, but it wasn't cathartic in the way people imagine. It wasn't because I got to share some trauma that it made me feel better. What was cathartic for me was taking the 10 years and trying to understand the motivation of fictional characters, which allowed me to think about why men were the way they were, why they were hard drinking, hard fighting, hard loving, why a mother would feel like she was out of options and why she didn't have all the privilege, as Edward explained, that some other women at the time had. And that was the thing that was cathartic for me, to decenter myself from the trauma and to consider instead a whole cast of characters.
So not driven by vengeance, like Édouard Louis has been saying in the past.
Sorry,
not driven by vengeance on the situation, on the past.
No, and actually for me, it was driven by grief and by loss. I think my anger had burnt out when I was younger, and I felt just really sad, actually, to be honest. And so I wrote it as a tribute to the women, but not only to, I do something in the book where it's an industrial landscape, and I really try to push the men away. I really do try to push them against the wall, against the landscape, and focus on the women at the heart of it. Because I'd known the women, first of all, to be the strength of the society at that time, to be very much overlooked. I mean, first of all, everything's defined by what your father does for a job or doesn't do for a job. Socializing is around soccer, or it's around going to a pub. And at the time, my mother couldn't go into a pub unless a man took her. And so, society in a way sort of excludes those stories, and you're told from those cues what is important and what isn't, what's going to endure and what isn't. And so when I sit down to write Shuggie, I just want the men out of there, other than the cause and effect they have. And to focus on the feminine, because actually that's what all the expression was anyway. The men didn't say anything. It was all action. And actually all the love, the tenderness, the expression was with the women.
Okay, let's hear it then. Yes, please. Yes. Do read. We discussed what parts will be read throughout the evening. I'm going to let you either introduce it or just start reading, whichever you prefer.
Well, let me just set the context for you a little bit. This actually comes from the heart of the book. And Agnes, the mother, after she has been pretty cruelly abandoned by her husband, has fallen in love. And it's a marvelous time in the family's history. But she is engaging Shuggie, and she's asked him to teach her how to dance like the kids today dance. Because frankly, she hasn't been on a date for an awfully long time. And so Shuggie, being a flamboyant little boy, is leading her down the garden path, as we say in English. "Dance for me, Hugh," said Agnes out of the blue. "Eh?" answered Shuggie, rolling over on the carpet. Leek groaned. He didn't like it when she made a pet of his brother. What good was a soft boy in a hard world? He left them to their nonsense, and they listened to him slam his bedroom door and knew he would be hunched over, his heavy headphones on, drawing again in his black book. "Go on, dance for me. I want you to show me how the kids today dance." Agnes put a cassette in the deck of the rented stereo. As she pulled her beaded jumper down over her thighs, he could see her mind was already elsewhere. "Well, you stand a bit like this." He opened his feet to hip width apart, and then he started to wiggle his bum. Agnes copied him. Like this, it looked more natural on her, on a woman. Then you have to shake your shoulders and move your hands just a little bit. He began a jerky shoulder shimmy, like one he had seen on the telly, done by a black singer with shoulder pads and a pineapple-shaped mohawk. Then do this a little bit, he said, moving faster and faster, swinging his palms wide in opposite rotation to his hips, a little bit like a skier, a bit like an epileptic. Like this? She asked, looking like she was having a stroke. Well, maybe. He was not entirely convinced. Do this next. He jerked like a robot and jumped forward and back like he was stamping out a fire. Agnes tried it, and all the glass ornaments in the cabinet tinkled. Are you sure this is how the young ones danced today? She said, already flushed from the routine. Oh, aye, said Shuggie, shimmying his shoulders lower to the ground, placing his hands on either side of his head like he had a headache. He had just taught her the routine to Janet Jackson's Control. Oh, I'm needing to rest for a wee minute. She collapsed onto the settee and picked up her cigarettes. You keep dancing, though, and I'll keep watching. I want to be a good dancer when I go uptown with Eugene. Shuggie felt tricked. If he'd known that, he would have taught her the zombie dance to Thriller instead. That would have shown her. But the song changed and Shuggie kept dancing. It was a self-conscious shimmy now. His hands burst open like fireworks, and his head flicked as if he had long, sexy hair. He dipped and popped, using his hips too much for a boy. He emoted along with the song like it was a grand opera and not a 3-bar Pop Factory hit for 13-year-old girls. Brilliant. What a smooth mover, she said. I'm going to do all this up the dancing next week. Eugene will just die. Just you wait. He was enjoying her attention. Something inside him flowered and he started popping his body like he'd seen the black boys on telly do. The self-consciousness left him again, and he spun and shimmied and shook in all the telly ways. He was mid-cat's leap when he let out a sharp scream. It was high-pitched and womanly, the same shriek he let loose when Leek leapt out of the dark at him. He hadn't seen them at first, and he would never know how long they had been there, but across the street, in the window of their front room, stood the McAvenis. They pressed against the large glass window and they were gutting themselves with laughter. The window throbbed as they beat their hands against it with glee, and Dirty Mouse did a little sexy girlish pirouette, and Shuggie realized that was him. He looked at his mother. When had she noticed? She only looked up at him and took a draw on her fag, and without glancing out the window, she spoke through her clenched teeth. If I were you, I would keep dancing. I can't. The tears were coming. You only know they win if you let them. I can't. His arms and fingers were still outstretched and frozen like a dead tree. Don't give them the satisfaction. Mammy, help. I can't. Yes, you can. She was still smiling through her open teeth. Just hold your head up high and gie it laldi. She was no use at maths homework, and some days you could starve rather than get a hot meal from her. But Shuggie looked at her now and understood that this was where she excelled. Every day, with the makeup on and her hair done, she climbed out of her grave and held her head high. When she had disgraced herself with drink, she got up the next day, put on her best coat, and faced the world. When her belly was empty and her wains were hungry, she did her hair and let the world think otherwise. It was hard at first to start moving again, to feel the music, to go to that other place in your head where you keep your confidence. It didn't go together, the shuffling feet and the jangly limbs. But then, like a slow train, it caught speed and he was flying again. He tried to tone down the big showy moves, the shaky hips and the big sweeping arms, but it was in him, and as it poured out, he found he was helpless to stop it. Thank you.
That's quite the gift, I think, from a mother to a son in that situation.
Yeah, and actually, Edward spoke a little bit there about how much his mother knew about him, and I suppose in many ways I'll never find out how much my mother knew about me. But in that moment there, I wanted to write a scene where Agnes, although she doesn't have language to say to Shuggie, it's okay to be yourself, it's okay, there's some kind of future for you. I mean, there was no language like that at the time. You can be safe, you can be happy, you can be an adult man that finds love. There was no language. She at least just says, I see you and I see what's going on. And how you're going to get through this is by keeping going through it, and also with a sense of self-worth, a sense of pride. And that's really Agnes's superpower in the book. You know, no matter what life throws at her, she gets herself up and she presents this very proud, very glamorous face to the world. And I had always admired that strength in the women around me.
Agnes also is a big fan of Elizabeth Taylor and makes herself beautiful and like you describe. I was reminded of that when I read that you write in the book about going to the theater or discovering a theater class and how it gave you a sense of control to be able to transform yourself, create the image you wanted to project for once and not be subject to what others see in you or think they see in you. I wondered if you could talk a bit more about that, taking control of the image you present and how important that is, because you went quite far in transforming yourself, if I may call it that. For example, your name, as it is now on your identity card, is Édouard Louis. It used to be different. So tell us, what does it feel like to transform yourself like that? Is it necessity? Is it liberating? Is there regret in it at all?
It's liberation. You know, for me, I talked about it a lot, but for me, my name was not only a name, it was not only a few syllables. It was the name of a childhood I hated. And the name I was born with, Eddie Belgueule, for me meant poor, it meant faggot, it meant everything I didn't want. And to change was to kind of break free from this past. And when I arrived in Paris and I saw a lawyer, I was so poor, I got benefits from the state to pay the lawyer. And we fought for months and months and months and months to change my first name and to change my family name. And you know, the first day I was called Édouard Louis, and I had my ID with Édouard Louis on it. Was the most beautiful moment in my life. People would call me Édouard, and I was about to cry every time, because Édouard didn't mean Édouard. Édouard meant you are free, and this is your liberation. I would go to the doctor or to the dentist, and they would say, Monsieur Louis, and I was about to cry. I was like, yes, it's me. And that's the name of my reinvention. That's the name of my liberty. That's the name not of what the world did to me, but what I did with what the world did to me. And this sense of liberation is what I want people to feel, and I want people to want it in reading my books. And this is something that my mother ran through also, because she changed her name too. She changed her name. After I changed my name, she said, I want a chic name like you. And she completely made up a name, and she changed. And sometime when I see her in Paris, we walk in the streets, and she say, we have very noble names, isn't it? You know? And I don't say that you have to have a chic name. You can have whatever name you want, but the thing is choosing what you can be and what you are in the limits that in which you can navigate, and this is really pure beauty. And I talk a lot about violence, but I want people also to know about that beauty. And that's the same thing with makeup. You know, like, there is nothing that is true for everybody. Like, there is no political category or political way of thinking that would work for everybody. because the world contains multitudes, as you were saying, and any class. And I know that for so many of my friends, for example, in Paris now, who are women who grew up in more privileged milieu, in more cultural milieu, for them to wear makeup and to look like what society expects them to be is a source of oppression, you know? It's like Marilyn Monroe. It's like you wear makeup or you die, or you are not, we exclude you from this society.
It's not a choice.
It's not a choice. And for so many women in my life now, from in a more privileged milieu, the act of resistance is to say, I don't want to fit in that image of what is to be a woman. I don't want to wear makeup. I don't want to take off my hairs. I don't want to, and that's beautiful. And for my mother, it was the opposite. She didn't have the right to be that, you know? Mm-hmm. So this makeup as a concept was a source of oppression for people in a more privileged milieu and a source of liberation for someone like my mother, because my father didn't want her. And so when she arrived in Paris, the first time she put so much makeup and she told me, am I not beautiful? And I told her, yes, you know, the Queen of Paris, you're so beautiful. And so when we talk about politics and what is liberating and what is not liberating, we should always be careful, because nothing works for everybody, you know?
And there is often talk of the working class, the poor, the bourgeoisie for that matter. So categories can blind you to nuance, to differences.
Yeah, clearly what Douglas was saying before, the difference between the working class or the lumpenproletariat, the underclass, is very big. And when I was a kid, when my father had an accident at the factory and lost his job, it destroyed his back. He couldn't work at the factory anymore. He was in bed for years and years, completely paralyzed, not moving. And we went from working class to underclass. And I remember when my mother was talking about working class people, she was talking of them as privileged people because they had a job at the factory and we had just the welfare. And so clearly, it's important to kind of like recreate like all the complexity of like the dominated milieu, the excluded world, and to try to find that and to find, yes, also what is going on for a multitude of people, what it is not only to be poor, but what it is to be a woman and to be poor, what it is to be gay and to be poor, what it is to be transgender and to be poor, what it is to be black and to be poor, what it is to be, I don't know. And I had the impression that when I started to write The End of Eddie, my first book and the books after, it was very difficult because people didn't want me to talk about that. They told me, if you do that, you say that the working class is homophobic, or you say that there is masculine domination in the working class.
And who said this?
So many people. In the media, in the press, everywhere. They were
those
saying,
who judged your work, basically.
Yes, those who judged my work. And the thing is, they were telling me, you are stigmatizing the working class people. But I was trying to make the category working class bigger, because there are also women in this milieu, and there are also gay people in this milieu, and there are also freaks in this milieu.
And it didn't fit a narrow definition of working class that was used until then.
Yeah, because this narration of working class was talking about an image of the working class man, of the good worker, and it's an extreme minority. And I'm in favor of fighting for extreme minorities. I'm in favor of talking about anybody, but we should know that it's an extreme minority. Mm-hmm. And
I'm going to stop you there because I want you to read, because you said many interesting things, but one fits in with what we decided you would read. And that's a particular friendship that your mother struck with a woman from a bit of a higher strand in the class, say. Let's see where we started it. Can we see the first translated line, please, to be sure? Yeah, okay. Here it. You were going to read it? Oh, you
no.
to
I wanted to check
I'm
if
so
you needed
20th
help.
century. I'm so sorry. If you want to read from
I can read
go
on
ahead.
this.
This is awkward. I'm sorry. I thought author, no book, Luckily, I have my book. Here it is. And then he has his phone. He has his book on his phone. Okay. My bad. Maybe it's safer for you to take your phone because really...
Est-ce que tu étais consciente?
Oui.
Is what it means?
C'est
Okay.
correct.
Sorry, my... I cannot talk all the languages. Oui, donc, alors, sorry, to just like Douglas, to just put in context, it's just when it's a moment where my mother becomes friend with another woman in the village, and this woman has a little bit more privilege than us. And through this friendship, my mother is trying to break free from her life and from my father. So this is a fragment talking about friendship as a transformative way against the conservativeship of family. Est-ce que tu étais consciente du miracle social qui se jouait, de cette possibilité soudaine de sortir de toi-même? Je crois que oui. Grâce à Angélique, tu te sentais plus forte face à mon père. Tu avais une alliée. Tu me chuchotais pendant que tu accrochais le linge et que je tenais pour toi la bassine d'épingle. À mon avis, Angélique, des fois, elle doit en avoir marre de ton père qui ne sait pas s'exprimer et qui ne sait pas se tenir. Je ne peux pas faire la liste de tout ce qui s'est passé grâce à elle, à travers elle. Vous alliez acheter des sous-vêtements à deux au supermarché. Vous alliez à la mer, entre copines, comme tu disais. J'ai commencé ton histoire en voulant raconter l'histoire d'une femme, mais je m'en rends compte. Ton histoire est celle d'un être qui luttait pour avoir le droit d'être une femme, contre la non-existence que t'imposait la vie et ta vie avec mon père. Et tu continues à partir avec Angélique toute la journée, les week-ends, à rire avec elle, à lui ressembler. Mais un jour, tout s'est arrêté. Angélique a rencontré un homme, elle l'aimait et lui a proposé de faire un enfant. La mélancolie d'Angélique, qui n'avait jamais quitté son corps depuis votre rencontre, s'est tarie, et progressivement elle s'est éloignée de notre famille. Elle venait de moins en moins à la maison, ses messages s'espaçaient, elle ne te proposait plus de sortir avec elle. Au début, tu ne comprenais pas. Tu disais que c'était étrange, mais que ça devait être à cause du travail, qu'il ne fallait pas s'inquiéter. Et puis, tu as été forcé de voir qu'elle ne venait plus chez nous, qu'elle ne te répondait plus. Une fois, quelque temps après son silence, tu l'as croisée dans la rue en revenant de la boulangerie, mais elle ne t'a pas dit bonjour. Tu as soupiré, les yeux vers le sol, le visage figé. Elle m'a même pas dit bonjour. Je comprends pas pourquoi. On était amis, non? Tu l'as rappelé quand même, une dernière fois, tu as essayé, mais quand elle a finalement décroché, elle t'a répondu de la laisser tranquille. Laisse-moi tranquille, Monique. Elle avait mis fin à votre relation. Est-ce que je te l'ai raconté? Je suis allé la voir chez elle. À moi aussi, elle me manquait. Quand elle a ouvert la porte, j'ai senti les larmes me monter aux yeux et je lui ai demandé pourquoi elle avait disparu. Elle m'a expliqué qu'elle ne supportait plus notre famille, les manières à table, la façon dont mon père te parlait, la présence constante et obsessionnelle de la télévision. Elle ne supportait plus. Sa dépression avait transformé sa perception du monde. Elle s'était sentie accueillie chez nous, à la maison, mais maintenant qu'elle était amoureuse, et ce qu'elle me disait heureuse, tout ce qui avait été invisible à ses yeux devenait insupportable. C'est comme si, au fond, la dépression amoureuse, un facteur psychologique dont elle avait souffert, avait rendu poreuses les lois habituelles de la sociologie, le fait que les personnes d'un milieu fréquentent les personnes du même milieu et qu'il n'y a presque aucun échange possible entre les classes. Maintenant, c'était terminé. Quand tu parlais d'elle, tu disais en haussant les épaules, de toute façon, on n'était pas assez bien pour elle. Tu te sentais abandonné, tu l'étais, tu étais seul.
It's very beautiful and heart-rendering, and I wonder whether the reader should despair or should hope, because the way it ends, one might conclude that friendship can never cross class boundaries and cannot be a basis. Personal relationships will never be a basis for social change. Is that your experience?
I mean, this was a very particular context. As I say, this woman, Angélique, I've read you only a very small part, but that woman, she was working, like she was part of the little elite of the village. You know, she was friend with the teachers. She was working for an electric company, and she went a little bit to university. She had a beautiful house. She had a beautiful little car, and she was someone we would never talk to. You know. People imagine that when you are in a small village, everybody talks to each other, but the distance is even bigger, in fact. The fact that you are so close push people to make the borders even harder. And we would never talk to her. And we, of course, I do her house, her door, everything, but talking to her was science fiction, really. But one day at the celebration of the village, you know, there were like some little roller coaster and little, you know, for straight men, guns like this, and that was very sexy. And that day we saw that woman, Angélique, and she was crying because her man had left her, and she was in love with him, I think, from what we understood. And because she was so sad and so destroyed, it kind of opened the door of the social class borders. And for a few months, we became friends. And as I say, my mother, through the friendship with her, she had an ally. She had an ally against my father. She was learning how to despise my father, you know, to say like he doesn't know how to talk. Us women, we know how to talk. We are more clever. And it was true. I mean, the women in my childhood were much more clever. And because, as I was saying, they had something to reclaim. That something, they saw something. And by the way, if there is something, a deep connection also between what Douglas says and does and what I do, is this long story of relationship between gay boys and women. You know, like it's the cinema of Pedro Almodovar, it's the cinema of Xavier Dolan, it's the books of Patti Smith with her friendship with Robert Mapplethorpe. And so it's a very long kind of tradition in a way, because we suffer from the same thing. And my mother was, yes, changing. But the moment this woman stopped to be sad, the social close borders were rebuilt, as I was reading about. And it was a very, very extremely difficult moment for my mother. Mm-hmm. We stopped seeing her completely from one day to the other, the day she met someone. But for my mother, it was one of the steps of her metamorphoses.
She had a foretaste of what was possible, perhaps, and a direction into which she could move.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I want to get back to this idea of resistance and of the politicized reading of the situation your characters are in, you spend part of your lives in. What is the basis of solidarity then? Is it only possible within a class, and then often part of a class, only among the men, only among the women, or is there... Can different classes, thinking within that frame, really understand each other? For example, through your books, do bourgeois people, just generalizing here, can they actually get what you're writing? What do you think?
I think so. I certainly think so. One small anecdote is I've been with my husband for 25 years. My husband's bourgeois. He is...
Does he feel that's an insult or not? I wondered about that, because it's a... loaded word,
I don't
no?
think he feels oppressed in any way, so I don't think he can take it as an insult.
Okay.
I think he cries into his degrees, if he, and his family holidays and 2 cars. I don't think he feels so
He can deal with it.
hugely oppressed by what I say. But we were together for about 14 years before I started writing Shuggie Bain, and he comes home to Glasgow with me. He's an American. He comes home to Glasgow. He knows my family. He knows the street I grew up in. He knows about, everything that already contains in the book. And yet, when he read the first draft of Shuggie Bain, it was Technicolor for him.
Technicolor,
it became
as like
Technicolor.
a movie. Yeah.
And suddenly, he understood the book, but he understood me in a way that he never understood before. First of all, even though I'm a gay man, I come from a long line of working class men, and we never talk about our hurt. We never share our stories. We don't show our wounds. It's just not something I was raised with. And so until really I was able to put it in a book, and that's the power of literature, to allow you to put your feet in someone else's shoes, as simple as that. He suddenly understood me on a whole other level. And so I think so. I think literature can connect us in those ways.
Mm-hmm. Can it also inspire real change, or is it only on a personal level that it can work, do you think? Because in the beginning, it sounded like you didn't really believe much in the power of literature. Now, I'm summarizing what you said very rudely, but tell us more about this power of literature. Books meant a lot to you too when you discovered them at 17, 18, right?
Yes, they gave me a frame and they gave me a narration, and I realized that I had a history that I didn't know. I had people who fought so hard to make me possible and to make my body possible and to make my existence in the streets possible. And
Like
I didn't
whom,
know that.
For example?
Simone de Beauvoir, Marcel Proust, so many people, James Baldwin, Violette Leduc, Gus Van Sant, Pedro Almodovar, so many
Because
people.
they talk about things that are about you.
They
Is
talk
that how
about
it
things that are
works?
related to body like mine. And I had the impression that throughout my whole childhood, people made me think that my history was my father and my mother, but my history was somewhere else. My history were those people who fought so hard to make me possible. And I wouldn't be here without those people. We wouldn't be talking here without those people. They made me possible. And the thing is, but it goes through a fight. And as Douglas says, there are obviously people in the dominant class that want to change things. I mean, I guess many people here, they want reality to change. That's why you are here. You want literature to change. You want the world to be less ugly. But the thing is, when I write, I also have the feeling that I'm writing for my enemies. I'm writing for. I know that most of the time it's the dominant class who will read literature, and I want to confront them to what they don't want to see. I truly believe that the role of literature have changed. I talked about that in the book I made with Ken Loach. The thing is, literature is not like it used to be. We are not like Zola or trying to do a kind of reportage to present reality. We know how the world exists. We know about racism. We know about poverty. We know about exclusion. We have social media. There is the internet. So we are kind of aware of how the world goes on.
You told Ken Loach you want to think about an ethics of confrontation.
Yeah, what it is to confront to what we already know, but we don't want to see. What the dominant class already know, but don't want to see. And that's what I'm trying to do. All this poverty, who ignore that there is poverty? Who ignore that there is women who are trapped in a house with a violent man? Who ignored that?
So you're trying to find a way to write about it in a way that people cannot look away, or that they act upon it?
Yeah, that they feel bad first, and that they feel an urge to act, to change something, or even if they don't like it, or if they don't want to address those realities, even if they want to stop me, or if they criticize me, or they attack me, they say something. You know, it's a little bit like the Yellow Vest movement in France, where there was a Yellow Vest movement in France, working class people going to the street and fighting. Suddenly you had a huge part of the bourgeoisie who said how much they despised poor people. They were making jokes. Oh, look, they are funny, they are ugly, they are ridiculous, they have no political thoughts, they have no political discourse. And suddenly, the Yellow Vest, they forced a part of the bourgeoisie to really say what they think about the working class. And that rest of the time, they don't want to say. They try to use a more like polite, a more politicized
euphemistic
discourse.
language.
And also, for me, an important piece of literature, it's like an important political movement. It's something that forces you to tell who you are, you know? And if we know who you are, if we know our enemy, we can fight against them.
Can you relate to this?
I can relate to it. I was thinking actually about how we spoke about solidarity in the working class. And actually, I wrote from a place where I felt no solidarity. No solidarity. Because I had always felt that solidarity was only offered to you if you conformed to what the community around you expected of you. And there's a cliche in fiction, you know, that the working class all rub along and we're all united against something. But actually, there are many divisions in my book. And I like to slice it as finely as I possibly can. There's obviously Agnes and Shuggie are rejected for almost the same core reason, but for very different reasons. But also there's divisions between Catholics and Protestants in Glasgow. And so I'd always known these very minuscule ways to sort of take people apart in that way. And so that, for me, was one of the things that I wanted to show.
Mm-hmm. All the shades and nuances and underlying cracks in what is seen as a monolithic block.
In fact, yeah. But also, you know, one of the questions in the book is, where do you belong if you don't belong in the place you belong? Because there is no mobility for the families at the heart of this story. There's more mobility for the men in my book, and I deliberately do that. I give them taxis to drive, and so they sort of zoom across the city. But Agnes and Shuggie are like characters in a Greek tragedy. They never come off the stage that they are on in that way. And yeah.
And they're shoved to the outskirts, really, of center stage as.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things. You know, I wanted to show Agnes as a lot of different things. She's a woman, she's a daughter, she's a friend and a foe, and then she's a mother. She is, for much of the book, a thing as well. She is a piece of property. She goes from her father's concern to her husband's to actually her son's. And that was important for me as well, to show how her fate is decided often by the men around her.
And her agency is limited in that sense.
Yeah, it can be. Well, she has a lot of agency. She doesn't always do the best things with it. I don't think you can allow Agnes Bain off the hook.
But coming back to what the literature can do and cannot do, were you ever worried about writing too beautifully? I'm asking it this way because your book has been applauded and lauded, I said it before, and people really relate to it emotionally very strongly because you write beautiful characters. But were you ever worried about writing it so warm and so humane that the reality of the gritty circumstances was lost on some of the readers?
I would have thought the audience would have thought I could have written about it more beautifully, because I get a lot of people who just sort of look at me with tears on their face and I feel, I'm so sorry. No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, I am a fiction writer. I don't write non-fiction. I don't know that that is in the future for me. I like to be able to inspire people by creating characters that just take them on a journey and hopefully at the end of it leave them feeling incredibly bereft. But there is an awful lot of pressure on someone who writes working class fiction. First of all, the middle class often say, oh, why are you telling us this? We don't want to know. What are we looking at? But then the working class also say, don't tell anybody that. You know, don't do that. But I had an epiphany about halfway through the book because I was having a conversation with an elderly aunt. And I realized that if I wrote a sentence that said, there was a yellow tablecloth on the table, she would say, Nobody wants to know you at a yellow tablecloth. And so there was a sense of I couldn't overcome what the class expectations were of my work and what I was allowed to tell and not allowed to tell. And so I just thought, I'm just going to tell it. But I don't find beauty very useful unless it's balanced with something. And certainly, I don't like ugliness or grimness relentlessly. I like them when they're together. And in fact, Glasgow celebrates a lot of things that sit in close juxtaposition with each other. It's a city that can be incredibly violent. It's also incredibly compassionate and tender, you know, and even during the saddest times, we have this deep well of humor that we come to. You know, there's a saying that you would rather go to a Glaswegian funeral than an Edinburgh wedding. You would have more fun. Somebody's clapping.
Yes, someone's from Glasgow.
I have a new best
there,
friend. But it's true. You just sometimes have more time, a better time with the working class when they're having a tough time than you ever would with the middle class. And you know, and I support that. And so that's really what I wanted to capture.
Yeah. Do you have a question for Douglas?
I don't know if I'm equal to Édouard's questions.
I have a lot of questions.
You don't have forever, but start with one.
You take me by surprise.
I'm sorry. Well, in that case, you think a bit. I'm going to put a question that was sent to us via Instagram by Miss Atsiri. She says, as an aspiring writer, I'm very drawn to stories about inequality and social injustice. Do you think an author can have legitimacy to approach these issues when he, she, or they doesn't come from a working class background? If you think so, how can we get it right?
I think everything is excused if it's done well. I think it's almost a difficult thing to say because you almost have to see the finished result. And I think if it's done with compassion and understanding, then you should be able to write about mostly everything. But that takes an enormous amount of skill. What I would say is I often wouldn't approach the issue as the thing you're trying to write about. I would write about humanity, and the issues should come through. I would write about love, or I would write about conflict, and then you can get to the actual social issue, because I think if you address it head on in that way, it might feel like you're appropriating something that wasn't yours, but if you can fold it into something that's very germane to the characters, then, and you do it well, then surely you have permission.
If you start from people, you agree with that?
Yes, I think that our life doesn't belong to them, to us, and thus that we all have the right to talk about any lives and any experiences. And the only question is truth. I prefer to read Douglas Stuart about a working class woman than to read Margaret Thatcher about a working class woman. So that's an obvious example. And the thing is, also there is, for me there is also, I talked about it when I published my second book, History of Violence, dealing with rape and sexual violence. I think that there is also a fundamental right for people not to talk about a pain that they did not choose, you know? Mm-hmm. And I remember after being sexually assaulted by someone, I didn't understand why I should be the person who would testify about it again and again.
It was expected of you, and you had to repeat it.
They wanted me to go and to talk about it and to go to the doctor and to go to the police and to go to the hospital and to go to the judge and to go to the lawyer. And for me, it would have been a liberation if someone had taken my story and if someone had been talking on my behalf. You know? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about appropriation, we kind of assume that people want to talk about what they've been through, but I'm not sure it's true. I'm not sure it's working this way. The question of who is talking, if it's only, like the question of representation, is it only men who talk about women? Is it only white who talk about black? Is it only straight about... This is another question, but this is not the same question. You know, okay. The question of representation and who talks are absolutely not the same question. And the thing is, I've met, I don't know about you, this is a good question for you, but I've met so many homophobic gay people in my life who would say the worst things about homosexuality in my life. Yeah. And I don't want them to talk about me. I prefer a straight woman to talk about my body or my person, or someone who says something real. And yes, it's very important to allow this right to other people and to pay attention that it's not only the dominant who talk about the dominated, of course, to leave room, but at the same time, the question should not be who, but what. What is being said? Is it something that liberates people, or is it something that oppresses people? Mm-hmm. And also one more little thing. The thing is, if we say that we should only talk about things that we experience, there are many experiences that we will never talk about, because some experiences deprive you from talking, most of the time. There is, at the beginning of this book called The Drowned and the Saved, Primo Levi, who was a survivor from Auschwitz, said a very unsettling sentence in which he says, the more I think about it, and the more I think that I am not a witness of Auschwitz, because the real witness are the people who died. The people who went through the whole thing are the ones who cannot talk, and only the ones who didn't experience the full thing can talk about it. And of course, it's not the same violence, but this is the same structure. I'm not comparing, it's not the same experiences, but what are the violence that we will never talk about if we put as a rule that we can only talk about the violence we went through? And we will make invisible so many people, so many pain, and so many lives. And I don't know how you feel about that, but in the working class community, people never talk like that. It's something also from the bourgeoisie. In the working class, people want to be represented. They never say, oh, my God, you take my words, no? What do you think?
Yeah. I also think we have to wonder what intention is behind it. And I think the writer has to consider what their intention is. What are they trying to do when they're telling stories that are maybe not theirs to tell directly theirs? They're of course allowed to do that. But the thing about the working class is sometimes I would worry that from someone from the outside would reduce it or not really truly understand what it was like with all of its nuance. You see it too often, I think, in media, certainly in cinema and in literature, where we fall into tropes and we can be drug dealers, we can be bad guys, we can be layabouts, we can be all these things. And so I think oftentimes you see people already appropriating stories or appropriating characters or things they don't know about and not doing it especially well. But that shouldn't preclude a writer from doing it. Like I say, you want it to be done with compassion, with the right intention, and to be done well.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever, you've both moved away from the milieu wherein you grew up. Maybe it sounds strange, but are you ever afraid you will forget or you forget what it's really like to live that life? Is that possible? Because, for example, you have lived so long now in the States, you've frequented totally different milieu, high fashion, so on. And how far, you're always you, of course, and there is a saying, the body keeps the score of what you went through throughout life. But as a writer, did you ever think, what was it like again? Or is it deeply, deeply ingrained?
Yeah. Actually, I never feel that. I never feel distant to myself or to my own experience. In fact, oftentimes I feel like I'm a vessel that I want to puncture to let some of that out. And so no matter where I am in the world, I think our personal experience, I don't know, for me anyway, it never feels far away. And in fact, distance for me creates an enormous sense of longing. And I was incredibly homesick, which allowed me to sustain the project for 10 years, even when I thought it wasn't going anywhere. You know, this is a book I thought was never going to be published, nor did I need it to be published. And so that desire to reconcile two parts of myself, or two chapters of my life, was something that really kept me going. And there was an enormous comfort, even in just listening to the language as it came on the page and how people spoke. I really, I found an enormous amount of pleasure in that. And so I don't think I will ever forget who that is. And like you say, the body does keep the score, and there's some deep scars, but there's also just the way that you approach everything in life. Your childhood informs everything. And even if it's homophobia that you suffer and your journey for self-love and acceptance that I certainly went on, I don't know about yourself, but it's so formative.
I am asking this question also because in your recent book, Changer méthode, I felt that time plays an important role, and that, like in previous books, every book you find a new angle, or you find yourself looking at it differently with more air maybe, and more space around the lens you look through seems to widen constantly and deepen at the same time. And this new book ends with a touch of nostalgia or melancholy, whereas before we might think that everything was horrible. No, it wasn't. Things resurface, memories resurface apparently with time. Is it time the factor that makes you look differently at the past?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Douglas. You don't forget, and even more than that, sometimes the more you make a distance, and the more you remember, because the truth of an experience is its relationship to other experiences. And it's what I say in Changer méthode. You know, when I arrived in Paris, and one day in a bar, I met a man who had a giant apartment, like, I don't know, 300 square meters. He gave me a glass of wine that was probably, I don't know, 1,000 euros bottle of wine. He told me to sit in his sofa, and when I was about to sit in the sofa, he told me, "Oh, be careful, it's polar bear, so don't put wine on this." And it was gross. And I mean, I hope he didn't kill it. And the thing is, when I sit there on this, how much a sofa like this would cost, with this expensive wine, that was what my father would make in 2 months for 7 people. We were drinking in it in 20 minutes. Then I see the scandal of my father's life, of not being able to eat every day, of having trouble to pay his rent, of being 55 years old and not being able to walk anymore, not being able to breathe without an apparatus after his accident at the factory. And then the more I go away from my father's life, and the more I understand this life. And so I could say, the further my childhood is, and the more I can see it, and I can frame it. And there is something. I'm curious to know how you feel about it, but there is something about traveling through classes that is very difficult to explain. It gets you a kind of very strange knowledge of the ugliness of the world that it's really difficult to transmit to other people, of our inferiorities. And that's why Changer méthode is a little bit like a book of images, because you see my father crawling on the floor after a day, sweeping the floor in the streets for the people. And the day after, you see people who have a castle, who have people who cook for them, and these people make fun of the people serving them. And just to have those pictures one next to each other makes it unbearable. I hope for people that it's out.
Yeah, but actually, I don't think I could have written Shuggie Bain had I not had any distance. Because one of the things that's remarkable, I think, about children, and I think what I tried to capture in the book is there's actually a comfort because they don't know better. And, I wrote a book that wasn't just about one family having a tough time, but it was about 26% unemployment in a city. There's families having a tough time all throughout this novel. And certainly there's children going through the same thing as Shuggie all throughout. And often that's the only solidarity in the book, right? These children that are taking on the role as caregivers. But as a young man, I had no idea that I was, even with a mother who died from addiction, even a father who abandoned, even the homophobia, I actually didn't have much concept that my story was especially unique or especially different, because there was so much hurt everywhere. I could see lots of families having a difficult time. And so really only it was when I went to New York, and the thing that happened to me was I was entirely erased. People assumed I was instantly like them, that I'd come through the same path as them, that somewhere, because especially when you work in something like fashion, they assume you come from some huge amount of privilege or some inside track. I never had an inside track. I didn't have a home to go home to for Christmas. I didn't have any of that, but it was just assumed and people stopped asking. And so the distance gave me perspective, but that erasure also made me want to tie all the parts of myself together to almost explain myself to the world. And I wouldn't have known to do that unless I had moved a class or moved environment.
Okay, this is the moment I'm going to break your heart. There is lots and lots more that we could be discussing, but I've already gone way out of line and way out of time. And you want your books probably signed, and we want these gentlemen to keep up the energy to write more. So we're not going to wear them down till the very end. But I want to thank you both for sharing so much with us.
Thanks to you.
And yes, that's all I can say, really. I have no more words than that. A heartfelt thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Merci. Merci.
And thank you too, of course. I feel like hugging everybody, but not yet. Give us a couple of minutes for the gentlemen to get ready. They'll be out there in the lobby where you can also find their books, unless you brought your own. Thank you again for coming all this way, being here, sharing these thoughts, and get home safely.
Thank you.